knives, and we're going to use a little computer wizardry here. So you all should see 5 knives on my board. If you were wondering what this white thing is in front of me, it's actually the camera that you're now seeing the board with. So these are the 5 essential knives. I'm going to go through them one by one. They are ranked sort of, the first 2 are definitely in order of importance. The rest one you could argue based on preference, but I think these are the order that they go. So the first one, of course, is the chef's knife. This is the real workhorse of the kitchen. The chef knife is probably the knife you're going to reach for the most. It's also the first knife you should buy if you go out and buy a nice knife. And we're going to spend most of the time today talking just about the chef's knife. The second one there is a paring knife. I like to call it the mini chef's knife. It can do a lot of the things the chef knife can do, but only in miniature. So if you wanted to chop up strawberries or core a tomato or pare an apple or wanted to dice up small pieces of ginger, your paring knife here would be your best option. And then after that, really those 2 could probably get you through 90 to 95% of your cutting duties in the kitchen. That's how powerful. Most of that is the chef knife, of course, but you do need that smaller knife. You don't want to be, trying to pare an apple with something like this, or trying to core one or a tomato. And then the third knife is the bread knife. Neither of the first 2 knives are really good. In fact, the next 3 knives all sort of have a particular focus, but the bread knife is the one that can get through a crusty loaf of bread because of this serrated edge. It works like a saw and rips right through a crusty loaf of bread as well as a soft crumb of a bread without tearing it up. And sometimes you can cut a piece of bread with a chef's knife, but a lot of times if you try to do like a big bowl or something, you might end up smashing the loaf. So that's why you want the bread knife. And then coming in at number 4 on the hit parade is the flexible boning knife. This is the one you would use to get meat off of a chicken or to get meat off of a bone out of a roast or something like that, or a steak or something. And the reason it's good for that is it's flexible. As you can see here, it bends a lot more than the other ones. Your chef knife will never really, or shouldn't, bend that much. And it's also smaller, which makes it agile and getting it around a bone and stuff like that. So that's the bone knife. And then the last one would be the slicer. And this is something that would be very handy coming up on Thanksgiving. It's great for cutting a roasted turkey, a pot roast, or not a pot roast, but a oven roast. So it in general is narrower than other knives, so there's less surface area, and it's also usually the longest knife. You have plenty of knife blade there to get through a thick piece of meat, or if you're cutting a steak at an angle or something like that. Not to say that you couldn't cut meat with a chef's knife, but this one is actually a little bit more suited for that. So those are the 5 most essential knives. Anything after that is sort of like, I would call it icing on the cake. You might get yourself, you might go out and get yourself a Sudoku, which is sort of like a chef's knife. It's sort of a hybrid of a vegetable chopper, but it serves a pretty good purpose, but it doesn't do everything. So it's like, again, I don't think you have to have it, but it's one of those knives. There's plenty of them out there that you might like over, as for a specialty or something like that, a vegetable cleaver, a meat cleaver. If you were into butchering meat, you would go get a cleaver. But for most cooks, this is the essential 5. And I'm wondering, I'm sure Fred has. Do you have every one of these, Fred? I bet you have every one of these. You're a little muted there.
I do, but I primarily use my Santoku knife most of the time because I'm not a total vegan, but I don't, I chop lots of vegetables, and I usually only are cutting chicken and things like that. I don't cut through bones. And so I use my Santoku for just about everything.
Right, exactly. Well, for the rest of what we're going to do here, we're going to focus on the chef's knife here. And I'm going to bring up here a little bit of anatomy. Don't worry about that. There's no tests. You don't have to memorize anything. You probably don't need to know most of what's on here. And you probably could figure out which is the tip, which is the edge, and where the handle is. But if you were to mistake this for the handle, then we really do need to have another class of on this. But really, honestly, the only two things I want to bring your attention to is two pieces here. One is the bolster. The bolster is a product of forging a knife, and it's that area there behind the blade, but in front of the handle. And there's a lot of controversy over whether or not you need a bolster. People will argue that a bolster gives you balance and gives you heft, and it does, it's true, but that's not necessarily required. So let me just bring it up here. Here you see this has a bolster too, but unlike the knife in the picture has a bolster that goes all the way down to the heel. This bolster stops right here. And the advantage there is if you were sharpening your knife without a bolster in the back, it's much easier to get that back corner, that heel there. So, you might want to consider that when you're looking at knives and saying, do I want the bolster? Am I going to sharpen my own knives? That sort of thing. We'll talk more about bolsters. The other thing I wanted to point out to you is the tang. Now in the picture, it's hard to see the tang because it's in the handle, but this is the tang. And this tang is called a full tang. It runs from bolster to the end of the knife. And the handle is actually scales that have been riveted to the knife. And there's, again, a lot of controversy. People think you have to have a tang like this. There is also something called a partial tang, or sometimes it's called a stick tang. This knife here is also a chef knife without a bolster and without a full tang. The tang is a partial tang or a stick tang, and it's been glued in here. And on this one here, it's been riveted to the handle. And so we'll talk a little bit more about why there's a controversy and stuff like that, which one you would want. But just for now, when you hear me talk about the tang, no, it is this thing. And in case of this knife, it goes all the way around. And then in this case, it's a partial tang. Okay. All right. All right. Let's talk quickly about knives, how they're made. I've really sort of shortened it here, but basically every knife starts as a strip of metal called a blank. The thickness of that blank is whether it's going to be forged or stamped, the two different types of processing, the two major types of processing a knife. A forged knife is like it sounds. It's like in the olden days, someone took an anvil and a hammer and put the metal there and forged the knife from hot steel. Nowadays, it's done with a series of machines that can apply up to 400 tons of pressure. So it's a little bit different today. And in a stamped, it's just like it says, a die stamps the metal,